Tonight's workshop is brought to you by A Faith That Does Justice, an interfaith organization inspiring faith in action and serving society's most vulnerable. I am very pleased to introduce Father Peter Jives, a Jesuit priest and founder and director of A Faith That Does Justice. Father Peter started this work in 2015 in San Diego, California, and moved the program to Boston in 2016. Father Peter is a board-certified pediatrician and pediatric endocrinologist. He has lived and worked in several countries outside the United States as a physician and priest, including El Salvador and Guatemala, and in several English and French-speaking African countries. Please welcome Father Peter.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. And thank you for all those who are watching us in Boston and beyond. We're very grateful that you're with us. And tonight we think we have a very special workshop where we're going to feature Timothy Schmalz, the Canadian sculptor, in a moment. But first, let me just say something about A Faith That Does Justice for those who might be viewing with us for the first time. A Faith That Does Justice is an interfaith organization that seeks to raise consciousness about social issues that affect the most vulnerable among us, and at the same time offer opportunities for people to walk in solidarity with those less fortunate than themselves. We do this in a number of ways. We do it through community meetings, which are large meetings, usually talking about a topic of social justice. It might be the immigration issue, it might be the prison systems, and things along those lines. And then we use workshops, which we're doing tonight. These tend to be more faith-based topics that really challenge us to live faith in action. And I think what we're going to see from Timothy in a moment is that his sculptures really are provocative. They're provocative in today's setting and really do challenge us to think about what it means to say we believe in a religious tradition, how different that is than really acting upon it from a value-based perspective. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Timothy. Timothy is a Canadian sculptor from St. Jacobs, Ontario. And about 25 years ago, he left a traditional art school disillusioned with contemporary art and desirous of sculpturing religious and secular art in the tradition of the Renaissance artists. His focus is often religious figures, and they're often presented in very large scale. The motivation for many of his sculptures derives from Christian scripture, which perhaps can be best summed up through Matthew 25, where we hear Jesus saying at the final judgment of time, that whatever you did to the least of these, my sisters and brothers, you did to me. Many of Tim's sculptures have been permanently displayed in various parts of the world, including St. Peter's Square in Rome, where his Angels Unaware, a piece that we'll discuss in a moment, was unveiled before Pope Francis on World Day of Migrants and Refugees in September 2019. So with that, I want to welcome Tim, and thank you so much, Tim, for being with us and taking the time to really share some of your inspiration, the work you've done, and we're excited to kind of listen to what you might have to offer us.
Well, thank you. Welcome to my studio. I'm very glad to participate in this conversation here.
Well, great. Yeah, before we get started on any particular piece, I just want to say that I've read along the way that you've said that you preach a gospel message with your hands and that your sculptures are only as shocking as the gospels themselves. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, I really do think that, and I have given us quite a bit of thought, that we need to have a more diverse way of preaching in the year 2020. I think that that people nowadays, I think, are inundated by so many different media, so many different images, different devices, that we really have to work harder, stronger, and more creative to bring out some of the more eternal truths within the Gospels. And so artwork, I think, is one of those ways of doing it, a very effective way. And so that's basically what I'm devoting my life to doing, is taking the ideas of the Gospels, taking some stuff that really has never been visually translated, and bringing it forward to people. I think it's a very powerful powerful way of evangelizing. What was the second part of that question?
I think you've answered it. It's really quite nice. I just want to say too that about maybe 6-8 weeks ago, I saw your work featured in the National Catholic Reporter, and I was very struck by some of the ones. Homeless Jesus, for example, they kind of had a picture of, and really, it's very thought-provoking, very moving, and really challenging. And I think we're going to see in a moment some of that. Another thing you've said, I think, along the way is the idea that your purpose as an artist has been to create art that has the power to convert and to create sculpture that deepens our spirituality, all the while communicating the Christian mandate to love one another. Can you just say something about that as we enter into a couple of these very powerful sculptures?
Yeah, I have an idea. There's an old. I think many people are familiar with the idea that Michelangelo saw the image within the stone, and then all he had to do was carve out what wasn't that image, or what wasn't that essence of that piece. And I like to think that there are those perfect sculptures, kind of in this platonic heaven. And my job is to pull them down. And I really do believe that and I do hope and that there are art pieces that could be brought forth that could really move people and really kind of convert them. And I think that historically artwork has always had that evangelical tradition. Oftentimes it's a gateway, an introduction for people to become familiar with some of the saints or some of the passages in scripture. And so my feeling is that if it's done to perfection, it will be very effective.
Yeah, excellent. And I think more recently, or maybe in the past couple of years, you've achieved quite a sense of notoriety around the world that many of your pieces are being displayed. But it wasn't that way. My understanding is at the beginning. For example, the homeless Jesus, I think I read that it took a year or so before anyone would really take it because it was so provocative. And I believe it's fair to say that St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York and St. Michael's Cathedral in Toronto initially turned you down. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes, it's fair to say, but I didn't say it. Actually, when it was first, when the first cast was unveiled at Regis College in the University of Toronto, the Toronto Star reporter came and interviewed the people that were surrounding the sculpture. And the reporter said, I don't know why she said it's what she said. I can't believe anyone would not like this sculpture. And then my old spiritual director, Father Peter Laracy, who's a Jesuit, who's actually right here. Can you see that? That's Father Peter. Unfortunately, he just passed away by the virus last year. So I'm very sad, but he really was a very powerful influence in my life, being my spiritual director. I couldn't find a home for the homeless Jesus, and it became a spiritual thing. So I went to Father Peter Laracy. I said, please, what should I do? And then he introduced it to the University of Toronto Regis College. The fascinating thing about that is he piped up and said, oh no, some people really do not like it. And then he mentioned a couple places that rejected it. And it's fascinating because it's a sculpture that I did that was really just kind of a spontaneous spiritual moment. I was actually in Toronto and I saw a homeless person completely shrouded with a blanket. And it was a haunting image because it was in the middle of the city, in the middle of the day. And I saw this human form and I just I said to my mind, that's Jesus. And I couldn't leave that. I went back to my studio and sculpted what I saw there and what I experienced there, and making a couple modifications, like revealing the feet of the homeless figure, just the feet. So you would see the wounds of being on the cross, identifying it with Jesus. But it was a fascinating experience because after I created the first cast of it, I could not find anyone that wanted it. I actually said to myself, the homeless Jesus has no home. I said that. And then when it went to Regis College, a couple newspapers showcased the work, and then the piece really had an impact that was really profound for a sculpture of Jesus in contemporary times to create a reaction. Just confirmed what we talked about before, that it can be, artwork can be an excellent way of evangelizing.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. So let's continue on with the homeless Jesus. My understanding is now that while initially you had trouble getting it accepted, it's in replicas of it exist in about 100 places throughout the world. So it really has taken off. It's had quite an impact on a good number of people, including it's being shown at the Vatican Palace, where Pope Francis converted that palace into a homeless shelter for 50 men and women, and apparently they walk by it each day as they come in and out. So very, very provocative. For myself, when I saw the first image of it, I think the space at the end of the bench, giving a person a location to be able to sit next to the feet of Jesus is very inviting, and it also it's very provocative. So I just want to ask you, was that something you initially had, or how did you come about the setup to that, really the way to create the impact that it has had?
Well, it was really touch and go, and that's one of the amazing things about being a sculptor. Things evolve and things develop as you create them. And when I was actually working on the piece, it unfolded in front of me as I was working on it. In fact, I was working on the feet of the piece on the piece of wood that the sculpture was, and I thought, this is probably the closest I ever got to a homeless person, because I was sitting right beside it working on the feet. And then I thought, yeah, it's almost like there's this tragic force field that surrounds these marginalized people in our cities. And then that's when the idea came for me to actually put that space so someone can actually sit there. And
Yeah.
that really became a kind of a very powerful part of the piece. The piece being on a park bench, placed where a park bench, installed where a park bench should be, really blurs the line between what is art and what is city. And I really like that idea. And so the artwork merges, no auspicious pedestal, ideally outdoors, installed outdoors. And so what I like to think is when the sculpture is installed in a place like that, the message blends in too, that gospel message blends in. And so, yeah, the evolution of the piece, the space on the park bench, I've heard by several different people about how that is a space, almost a pew or a spiritual seat that they have where they can get into some deep praying. And I heard that from many different places around the world where the piece was installed. And so that makes me really happy to have a seat in the middle of a city that has that message.
Yeah, no, very nice. I think, another thing I just want to mention too is it's very challenging. And I read recently in the paper that in a upscale or upper middle class neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, in this country, where you had a median household income of over 100,000 with people living in poverty at less than 3,000. So people really not used to seeing homeless people. That a replica of your homeless Jesus was making the rounds in some of the churches in that area outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And when it was moved into another parish, someone saw it from the neighborhood and they called the police that there was a vagrant outside the church and they wanted him removed. The police showed up and they interviewed the pastor, and he said, well, that's why we brought him here, to really try and raise consciousness. So I don't know if you, from the front end, whether that was something you recognize could be that provocative to especially people who are not used to seeing the down and out, or the people living on really the underside of history.
Yeah, that is interesting. People oftentimes in many different locations where the piece is installed call the police on the Jesus. They also call the ambulance. They also call the paramedic. And one of the fascinating things is here in Canada, in Toronto, when there's a blanket of snow on top of the sculpture, it's another layer of meaning that's brought forward the piece. And it's interesting because I think that's one of the powerful things about artwork. Artwork tends to crystallize something. And I do believe that artwork has that power to make people see what oftentimes is invisible. And the piece has in a perhaps made a lot of people, and I know this, made a lot of people uncomfortable to see Jesus represented in such way. And I don't think it makes them uncomfortable because that's not something they've seen in the Bible. Of course, it's like a visual translation of Matthew 25, very direct Matthew 25. Whenever you've helped the least of my brothers and sisters, you've done that to me. It's not just, it's a good thing to do. It's a nice thing to do. There's a direct link there, right? And so I think that a lot of people are familiar with hearing that, but seeing it is something different. And so what I'm saying is that if we can, as we evangelize, use our eyes, not only our ears, and bring forth these amazing eternal truths that are held within our scripture and turn them around so people can see them and appreciate them in different areas. One of the things about that piece that kind of really impressed me was I did it for homeowners to look at so they could see Jesus in the marginalized. But one of the powerful things that was brought to my attention after it was installed in places like Detroit and Washington, D.C., it's how the homeless, and actually Atlanta, is the homeless people really appreciated that piece. And you have to think that one of the first things that society strips from these homeless people is their sense of self-worth. And when you have the Son of Man looking like them, instead of with the perfect abs and the crown on the head, then that makes them understand that they are sacred and they are just as valuable as a politician or a successful businessman. And that, I think that's a real powerful message that I love about the piece. And this is going to be what we're probably going to be talking about in the future. But having that face concealed not only is consistent with Matthew 25, because there is that there is that ambiguity. God does not identify himself right at the first part. It's a eureka moment that is within that text. And like the sculpture, people approach the sculpture, they don't see the face of Jesus. They put their own imagination of who that Jesus is. And so in a sense, I think it's a home run. I oftentimes say that that's the best portrait of Jesus I did, the one with no face, which is interesting.
Yeah, sure. And I think too, you've mentioned before that a lot of your inspiration comes out of the scriptures themselves. You've mentioned several already, that you listen to the scriptures a lot and you look for inspiration, from which comes some of the sculpture work, I believe.
Yeah, what I do in my studio here is I basically listen to an unabridged version of the Bible every single day, and I've been doing that for more than 5 years. Actually, now with the virus, I'm actually listening to the news quite a bit because I'm interested in what's going on. But 4 years previously, I would come to my studio, I would turn on the Bible and listen to it all day long. And there's a couple points that I wanted to do. You can read the Bible once and you can benefit from it. But what would happen if you listen to the Bible for 4 years on repeat? What would happen? So I'm kind of a guinea pig for myself to see what's going on. My visual is completely taken up throughout the day. My audio isn't. And so it's a fascinating thing because it penetrates you in a way that is very unique. And I think what it does is it really has the chance of benefiting my artwork, because it's almost like the scripture kind of sinks in me, and it becomes part of my artistic library that I can pull this off the shelf, take a look at it, see if I can work this within a specific sculpture that I'm working on, or be inspiration for a new concept, a new idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you work exclusively on one thing at a time, or when you get the intuition, do you work on 2 or 3 things at the same time?
Well, usually, as you can see in my studio here, I'm working on a piece that's almost a sculpture park in its own right, with all the figures worked within it. But even though I'm working on this sculpture, I'm also working on the Divine Comedy. I'm actually sculpting every single canto of the Divine Comedy, which if we could turn the camera, you could see over there, but don't worry about it. They're all wrapped up. But so I'll start in the morning, usually at 4 in the morning with Dante, and I'll work 2 or 3 hours on that. And then before 9 o'clock, I work on this piece here, right? Okay. And so I'll work on this. This is a pretty big piece. So I'll work on it pretty much nonstop till it's finished.
Yeah, okay. Well, with that in mind, let's move on to our second topic, which was the African or Black nativity, which I find fascinating as well. What's the inspiration behind that in terms of, I mean, people are certainly in the Western world where we're used to seeing Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes, and here you have created one that's quite different.
Yes, the idea about the African American nativity is it's a couple ideas behind it. Essentially what part of the inspiration of it is, well, every single Easter, I lock myself in my studio and I create one sculpture of Jesus. And so, and one of the part of the project is that I don't necessarily know what I'm going to do till I start. And it's kind of whatever I'm doing, even if I'm doing a large sculpture like this at Easter time, start working on a new piece. And I think that for years I've been, like the homeless Jesus, been struggling with the face of Jesus and how to represent the face of Jesus. And I think that's one of the reasons what created the Shrouded Matthew 25 series. It's a hard thing to do, really. And I would probably say that I have sculpted the face of Jesus probably more than any other sculptor alive today, because I have done literally hundreds of faces of Jesus. And it always really makes me wonder how to get to as many people as possible. Okay, I'm German background. Our church, our heritage, it's quite seated in Europe. But today we have so many people that in North America specifically that are Catholic, that are Christian, or that should be Catholic and should be Christian if they had the proper invitation. And I oftentimes think that we're not holding out that artistic welcome hand when we have all of our sculptures looking like they're, you know, Euro Renaissance sculptures, right? And so what I've done, I've made an effort, a serious effort to kind of bring welcoming, artistic welcoming into other groups of people that absolutely deserve it, like the African American. So I've been working on that series for a couple years right now. I also want,
Yeah, let me ask you too, you know, in this country for sure, I don't know if in Canada it's hit you the same way. You know, there has been great consciousness raising by the Black Lives Movement in the recent months in this country over the summer, the horror of what many people are seeing and coming to grips with as being a reality, the racism that exists in this country and beyond. And I realize this, your African nativity would have been created before this, but it's quite timely now and really resonates with, I think, a growing consciousness of many people in this country and maybe beyond to be a little more sensitive to the reality that God is present to all people and that the nativity is a way of expressing that.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because obviously my interest was taken by the sudden focus on sculptures in not only America but around the world. And although the destruction of the sculptures really kind of made me cringe, because I make sculptures and I realized how much time it goes into this. And but then I thought, you know, it's really interesting because a lot of those sculptures that all of a sudden hit the spotlight seemed to be invisible for decades, perhaps even a century beforehand. And all of a sudden, there it is on the surface of our culture right now. And but that really confirms to me or supports my idea that artwork is important, that it is important, that people do see, that they are impressed by what they see represented in artwork. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe too, the artist sees before the general population, leading people along in terms of increasing consciousness.
Yeah, it's fascinating because at Easter I finished the African American Nativity, but prior to that, last year I had a conversation with Cardinal Gregory, Archbishop, or now he's a Cardinal Gregory, right?
Yes.
It was fascinating because he commissioned me to do a corpus in Atlanta. That's where he was before he moved to Washington. And I remember I said, I am going to go and I am going to present the idea of doing an African American Jesus on the cross for him. And we got along perfect. He loved the idea. And so there, this is like 2 years past. And it's interesting because one of the things that I find with representations, Christian representations that are African, is that it's almost too much in your face. And I wanted to do artwork that would not have like the African nativity with the zebra, with the lion, with the giraffe. And I didn't want to make it, I wanted to do a series of pieces that were not too over the top. And I think that's a problem with the artwork too. If it becomes too forced, then it becomes, it loses its power in a sense, right?
Sure. Yeah, now here's a curiosity from my perspective is when I saw the African Nativity, maybe counterintuitive was the idea that in your sculpture, it's more Joseph holding the baby than Mary. Was that obviously it was intentional, but what was going on there? What were you trying to show?
Yeah, I wanted to, well, it's fascinating because I've created sculptures that want participation. I want like the homeless Jesus, where you can actually sit on the sculpture. In fact, you're encouraged to sit on the sculpture with that space there. And I want artwork, I want sculpture not to be passive in a sense. I want it to be assertive. And so historically, the nativity is represented with the baby within the crib, and they're just, the Joseph and Mary are just looking at this, praying. And I wanted it to have something more hands-on, so to speak. So literally, the hands of Joseph have scooped up the baby, and there's that emotion, that love represented there. And so, yeah, I think it works.
That's what struck me. And I think in general, it's a story of oppression. You're taking that nativity scene in the context of for us right now, Black Lives Matter. And it really draws us out into the idea of recognizing that these were oppressed people, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, going way back, that the story of oppression continues in history. So, okay, well, let's move on now to, I don't know if you consider Angels Unawares as it certainly is maybe your largest sculpture. I don't know whether you consider it your proudest or greatest or what, but it's quite a imposing structure here in Boston. As you probably know, it's now at Boston College outside their O'Neill Library. For anyone watching in the Boston area, you can access the BC campus and it's free. It's right outside the O'Neill Library, and it's worth going to see. It's a massive structure. I would say, I believe it's about 20 feet long, 11 feet high, maybe weighing 2 tons, and having 140 figures in it. So give us what's going on there. What made you come up with that?
Well, this was an amazing opportunity as a sculptor. In fact, the sculpture is 20 feet, and it is one of the most complex sculptures, not only that I've ever done, but also most bronze foundries rarely cast a piece that is so big yet so complex. It's one thing to do a 20-foot statue. It's another thing to do a 20-foot statue with more than 100 different figures in. So it was really interesting. But the idea or that project came out when I was requested after the Vatican opened up their new Department of Migrants and Refugees, actually by a conversation I had with Cardinal Czerny in Rome. He suggested that I create a sculpture on the theme of migrants and refugees. And I remember saying to Cardinal Czerny, I have a lot of sculptures that would fit that issue, and because it's something that's very close to my artwork and my heart. And he said, no, please think of something that is specifically refugees, migrants, immigrants, etc. Right? And so I came back to my studio here in Canada, and I was thinking, okay, I'm up to the challenge. I'm up to thinking about a new sculpture. And it's almost like it dropped right down from heaven into my mind, the idea of Hebrews 13:2. Because I listen to the Bible nonstop, if I hear a passage, sometimes it just takes hold of me, and I feel totally inspired to do a sculpture on it. Hebrews 13:2, be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. I was wrestling with that for more than a year, with sketches, with little models. How can I represent that? How can I take that, one of the most beautiful passages in the scriptures, and actually create a sculpture of it? It wasn't until I came back from Rome, the whole idea of having all these figures from all refugees, migrants, immigrants from all historical periods of time on one raft. And in the center of this crowd, there's an angel, but you can only see the wings because of the crowd of people. So the wings become everyone's wings. And that sculpture was an amazing project. And fascinating enough, I do believe that it is, although it's 20 feet, it's a very, very subtle sculpture, because it's not like you have three figures, one from Asia, one from Africa, and one from Europe, and then an angel. This one, in order to be subtle, in order for me to take that scripture and make it discreet, I had to put hundreds of figures in it. So it's not just kind of a simple piece, but it's more discreet.
Yeah, and tell us about some of the people in it. You talk about different periods of time in history, people coming from fleeing different situations of genocide, slavery, wars, hunger, oppression. Tell us about some of the individuals that you put in there.
Yeah, when I realized that it was going to be an epic sculpture, it allowed me to put in so many different figures, and the presentation of them was very important. So literally, I remember talking to Cardinal Czerny as I was developing the piece. I would go to Rome and show him how the project is going, and we were actually sitting there having a conversation, and I said, well, I guess it's going to have everyone in except the indigenous people. And I think he slapped me. I don't know if he slapped me or if he just, but he said, Tim, think about it. They were not on a boat, but they were still people that had to move. And I thought, oh my God, the Trail of Tears, the Cherokees. And I was just like, went back to my studio, and on the back of the ship, on the back of the boat, I had a Jew that was weeping, and he looked awesome. But I already had around 3 different Jews worked within the different area. One at the front, a Hasidic Jew in the front, right beside the Muslim. Perfect positioning. And so I took the weeping Jewish person, and I transformed him into a Cherokee. Trail of Tears. It was amazing. But the sculpture, because it has 140 different figures in, it gave me the opportunity to authentically represent the migrant experience, the refugee right beside the immigrant, which is very important, because I wanted visually to make that message that we all came from some other place anyway. And so this sculpture kind of shows that, which is very important, right? When I was in St. Peter's Square, the last time I was in St. Peter's Square, 6 Sikhs came up that lived in London. And I pointed out to them several different Sikhs with the turbans from different historical periods within the piece. And so it's not just a soundbite, which was very important for me, that there was that authentic representation. At the front of the boat, there's a Polish coming into North America after the wars. There's a Jew escaping Nazi Germany right beside a Syrian woman. And it's fascinating because working on a big sculpture like that, I was working with humans, and I was working with so many different stories woven into the piece. So it's not only their dress that was authentic, I had to get their emotion authentic, and I couldn't just make it kind of like the ship of doom. There is that triumph, there is that comedy, but there's also that tragedy. And oftentimes it's side by side within the piece, just like the different races and the historical periods all mixed up. So anywhere you look at this, you get that kind of visual understanding that, and this is something that Cardinal Czerny really promotes, that this is a human thing, people moving. And so you get that when you see it at any different angle.
Right. And you even have Jesus, Mary, and Joseph on this at one point, kind of off to.
I had to. I had to, because one thought when I was working on it is what Pope Francis said several Christmases ago. He said, don't forget Joseph, Mary, and Jesus as the Holy Family were refugees. And then he went on to talk about, he went to continue. This is at Christmas time, right? So I thought, I wouldn't have done it I wouldn't have put them in if it was only like a small cluster of figures, but because it's 20 feet long, I can put them in. So that was a discrete thing that people can discover within the piece. Yeah. In fact, it's on the side in St. Peter's Square that's closer to the pillars. And I thought absolutely perfect, because I want it to be very subtle. Some people will see it, other people won't. That's fine, right? But I wanted to, like, the fascinating thing is with that one piece, there's so much welcoming involved, and there's so much spirituality. It's spiritually centered. The angel's in the center of it, but it's not in your face, and I like that.
Yeah, and I think you've mentioned too the idea that as large as it is, it's in many ways subtle and quiet and silent, and it's an opportunity in somewhat of a reflective or spiritual sense to reach out and encounter God in the stranger, that is present in that. So let's, we have just about 5 more minutes of this kind of dialogue, and then we're going to get some questions. So TJ, maybe you can kind of think about moving us towards the Let the Oppressed Go Free, which I think is your current sculpture that you're working on.
Yeah, we'll take a little walk around my studio.
Yeah.
Is this that sculpture?
Go ahead, please talk.
This sculpture here, Let the Oppressed Go Free, is such a challenge. And it's a challenge because of, simply because the subject matter is really, really heavy. I've been working on this for more than a year now, 1.5 years. And it's at the point that everything's coming together on the work. Now, what I love about this sculpture here is, well, the story about this piece here is I was going to do another design until I started researching more about human trafficking. And I said to myself this one day, I said, they're sucking our children underground. And I thought about the Pied Piper of Hamelin, where the piper was not paid for removing the rats. So he made a different song, and that's brought the children into this opened up earth, and the children just went inside the earth. So this sculpture here, if you can come over here, starts with the hero, Saint Piquita. And she is opening up the earth and letting the oppressed go free. So Saint Piquita, she is, I'm sure most of your listeners are aware of who she is. She was a slave from a previous century, and she's the perfect ambassador for this sculpture. She's the one that's opening up this sewer grate and letting the oppressed go free. You can see here The sculpture being 20 feet gives me the opportunity to represent all of human trafficking. In the worlds of human trafficking, there's a lot of criticism about only one type is usually represented. That's a sex traffic, but there's many more. There is the babies that are sold. There is the organ trafficked people. There are the domestic workers. You can come over here, TJ. And you have the child laborers, you have the child bride, you have the laborers, the slave laborers, and then you have the sex traffic. But also the sex traffic, you can see here, they look like prostitutes, but I also have ones that don't look like prostitutes, which is very important because a lot of the criticism is that people see these images of these girls in slinky dresses with their hands tied. That's not necessarily what human trafficking is. Human trafficking is someone that's a university student that no one knows what the hell is going on with her. It's also the child soldier. So this and the family member. And so this really gives a real authentic idea of what human trafficking is. And it also, like it's a very difficult subject, but it has the details of like the tattoos that are carved on some of these women by their owners. It's a really upsetting sculpture, but you can see they're becoming free. So it is, in a sense, a comedy, right? They are getting out of the ground. It's fascinating because when I started this sculpture, you can see my model here. Maybe you can show. I usually start with little models. Can you show this? And this is the first model. It's just sitting here, but that's how I start a piece, right? But as I was working on this model, I read that Pope Francis said that human trafficking will always exist if it's kept underground. And so literally with my artwork, I'm showing that, which is fascinating because I think that it's a perfect way of describing what's under our society. And so to have the sculpture installed where it's on a city street, it's meant to disrupt your normal day from the office going home. It's meant to disturb you, but it's also meant to show a message of hope. And again, what we were talking about with the concern about the African and the oppressed in America, let the oppressed go free, I think is awesome too, because you have the hero Saint Piquita. And she's subtle. She's letting them free, and it's I think basically one of the greatest ways of representing an African saint to the world as well. So. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me ask another question as we, let me invite our audience. If you have questions, please send them in and we'll try to get them asked for you in the remaining 10 minutes or so that we have. But Tim, let me ask you, does this have a destination? Are you commissioned to send this piece to anyone in particular?
Well, it does have one firm destination right now. My hope is to have many destinations for it. Usually with big bronze sculptures like this, you can do 10 bronze casts of it. And so I hope to place 10 in strategic places around the world that people can see it. There's no end of appropriate places for this sculpture to actually go to. And I think that what I'm trying to do right now is find the best locations that as many people as possible can see the piece, right? But you do know that the Angels Unawares sculpture in Boston at Boston College, that's actually going on a cross-American tour.
Right. And
the next stop is going to be Brooklyn, New York. And
wow.
That's happening in December. So yeah. And then from there, it's going to Atlanta, Georgia. And so one of the great things about even though there will only be 10 casts in the world being made of this piece, what my hope is that it can go to many different places on a exhibition tour so people can see it. But I think that the powerful thing about the sculpture is, I think what we mentioned earlier, and one of my favorite quotes is by Oscar Wilde concerning artwork. Oscar Wilde said that the people in London didn't see the fog till the painters started painting it. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about artwork is it does bring people's attention to things, right? And so as I'm working on this piece here, my heart's sinking about some of the figures that I'm representing and some of the research I have to do. And my hope is to use artwork as a weapon to destroy indifference, to create awareness, and then to create change. It's like what Pope Francis said: human trafficking will always exist if it's kept underground, because no one knows about it. No one's going to do anything. Well, how are you going to bring awareness? Use art. Why not? A 20-foot bronze sculpture.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions that have just come in, and I think you may have mentioned this, but not everyone, I think, is aware that you create these in clay and then they're created into bronze. So maybe just explain that process, if you would.
Yeah, it's a crazy process. After this piece is done in clay, then I take it apart literally with a knife, and I've already started doing that right now. Well, I could pull pieces off, make molds of different sections, and then like a big jigsaw puzzle, it's welded together into one piece. So when I'm working on it, even right now, I'm thinking, how are we going to make a mold of this and then cast it and put it together, right? So it's a tricky process. A piece like this is very difficult because it's detail. And so, but I think it will work out well. I'm a little bit nervous, I'll be honest.
Another one is, what's down the road? Do you have any great inspiration that would be, something that would capture social conditions in this country that you might be thinking of? That would be another one of your bigger projects.
Right now, I'm working on this piece. I'm working, after this, I'm finishing up my Dante project. And it's really interesting because the Dante, what I find, this is the 700th anniversary of Dante coming up next year. And what I find is that that there's so much creativity, there's so much that Dante has to offer us, and even today. And so if I can give a representation to that will encourage people to read Dante, that's what I hope. But so I'm working on that project. But
when do you expect that one to be completed? There's a question here about when that might be done.
Dante. I'm on Canto 77 or no, so it's fascinating because I was working early in the morning this whole year, and on the Divine Comedy really early before I start working on this one, right? And I hear what's going on with Italy right now, and during that period of time. And then I thought about Dante writing the Divine Comedy in exile. And it's interesting because I thought, yes, if Dante was not in exile, the Divine Comedy perhaps would not exist. He would have been busy with his politics in Florence. And I thought how amazing that some things that are negative, environmental things can really turn out to be positive, like the Divine Comedy. A lot of people don't read the Divine Comedy, and my children know who Dante is, but that's because I talk about him all the time. But I want to do sculptures that will make people want to read the Divine Comedy, and so and there's so much spirituality in there. I'm in paradise right now with I'm on Canto 6 of Paradise, and it's just fascinating. It's just absolutely fascinating. So if I can give a visual advertisement, a visual promotion with my bronze sculptures to Dante, that's what I'm doing. But I do believe, like I mentioned before, I have this Platonic idea that those amazing sculptures are up there in heaven, And all I have to do is, with my time and my energy, I just have to pull them down. So I do believe, and it's fascinating, with the homeless Jesus that's been placed in cities around the world, it makes me think that there is so much more with Christianity that has yet to be represented and expressed in artwork.
Yeah, let me ask you this about, speaking of creation and all, the stewardship of creation, the environment. Does anything like that inspire you going forward?
I wish I could untie that knot, and I've been working on the ideas of that. I just did a piece of Saint Francis that's it's okay, but it doesn't do what I want it to do, right? And I think that's the interesting thing with artwork. You have to be like a machine gun, and you have to do art. Like usually I start at 4 a.m. and I stop at 5 in the evening, and
Oh.
that's and I have been doing that for years. And the idea is that I cannot put my put anything in the way of doing that great piece. The one person asked, what do you have next? Well, unless I get done these 3 pieces, it might be the 50th one that's going to be the amazing one about the environment. But I have to get through these new creations before that one surfaces. Kind of like the monkey with the typewriter. You put the monkey down at a typewriter long enough, and a beautiful poem will come out. I think that's the life of an artist. They have to put those time in, because you never know. I never knew that the homeless Jesus would exist. I was walking down Toronto out of my studio, but I was open. I was open to that creativity, right? Yeah. And I had my artistic radar on, so to speak. And so you always have to be present, because some great sculpture might be around the corner.
Yeah, no, interesting. We have a bunch of questions I'm going to put into one. People are asking, how long do these Angels Unaware or Let the Oppressed Go Free, these really larger structures, as a general rule, how long would it take you to make one of them from start to finish? And then how do you transport it, the massive structures, from one location to another?
Oh, I cannot. It's crazy the amount of time I spent on the Angels Unawares. I had the deadline. I was quite aware that it was going to be installed in St. Peter's Square, and there were going to be 50,000 people at the unveiling. And so I thought, I cannot mess up on this, right? So I dropped all my other sculptures. I wasn't doing any Dante piece. I was just working on that. And it took me about a year nonstop. And at the end of the day, literally, I would stop working when I physically and mentally could not work anymore. But usually a piece will take around a year to do. With the Angels Unawares, it's 3.5 tons, I believe, or 2.5 tons. It's strong. Bronze is super strong, which I really appreciate, because you can't destroy it. It's almost impossible to destroy. And so we transport that by cranes and a flatbed truck. And it's pretty easy. I can't believe it. It can be moved. It was moved from the LA Cathedral. It was going to start its tour in the LA Cathedral, but because of the virus, there was a total shutdown. And so it went from Washington to Boston. Now it's going to Brooklyn. Very easy. I'm still impressed on how they move it with the cranes.
Okay, we have a number of people are asking how they can get in touch and learn a little bit more about you. Do you want to tell them how they might get to your, find out more about your sculptures? I know you make miniature sculptures and ones that people can have in their home.
Yeah, I have a pretty good presence online. If they Google me, just my name, Timothy Schmalz.
Okay.
They will be able to see a lot of my sculptures, including if they go on my Facebook page. I try to post more up-to-date things because it's easier, but you'll be able to find my websites. And but if you go on Facebook, you can see more recent stuff that I'm doing. I think I just did a post of this a couple of days ago, right? Okay. And then other interesting things associated with the sculptures.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, we're about at the end of our time. And I'd like to just say, I think probably on behalf of many people watching, that we're very grateful that you've kind of opened a door for us, opened a window, perhaps to be able to see sculpture or art as another way of living faith in action. I think, at least from my perspective, I think the works that I've seen that you've done, when we first talked, I mentioned this, that I was very moved by the call to action. I mean, basically, you're asking people, as we often talk about, the idea of moving beyond the church, the temple, the mosque, and moving into society to deal with people who are suffering and to live the values of a faith-based person in society to create a better world, a more just world. And I think that's what your art is doing. And it's really commendable. And I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I hope it will continue. I look forward to seeing more.
Well, thank you very much. And I change St. Francis's quote, preach everywhere you go, and if necessary, even use artwork or anything else that you feel inspired to do. And I think that's how we have to move forward to be heard and to kind of rejuvenate our faith is creativity, however, dancing, poetry, art.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And as we end, I would like to just maybe try to offer to some of those who are watching, if people are saying, well, this is all very nice, now what can I do to move my own faith into action? We have a pop-up here that will give you some ideas, at least some suggestions that you might think about related to homelessness, racial justice, and oppression. Homelessness, you can donate clothes. Racial injustice, you can educate yourself by looking at the website we've just mentioned. And oppression, you can volunteer to teach in different ways, helping people in need. And from a faith that does justice, we really run the English as a second language, and we feel free to contact us about that. Our webpage is www.faith-justice.org. If you contact us through there, there's a sign up on the homepage, and we'd be happy to be in touch with you. And we'd ask people to think about really walking with us as we try to really take the inspiration of someone like Timothy Schmalz to live faith in action. And again, with Tim, we're just so grateful for what you're doing, and pray that you will continue to do the good work you're doing and to inspire many people to live faith as it's meant to be lived. And I think that's what you're really challenging us to do tonight. So thank you very much.